And it's almost there, nearly 10 years after Crystal Rogers disappeared. Opening statements in the second trial in her case will begin tomorrow, Wednesday, in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Doug Proffitt, WHAS 11 News, as we are once again bringing you special coverage here on WHAS 11 Plus each night of this two-week trial. It's Brooks Houck and Joseph Lawson facing a jury. It is the trial of the decade in Kentucky. Brooks Houck, Crystal Rogers' former boyfriend, is charged with murder and tampering with physical evidence in the case. Joseph Lawson, whose father was convicted just 3 weeks ago, Steve Lawson, is facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. The jury was seated late today in Bowling Green. Our Shay McAllister is once again back in Bowling Green covering this nearly 2-week-long trial we expect it to be. So, Shay, the prosecutor tells the potential jurors there is no body. We've never found the victim. Were the family members in the courtroom hearing this today? I'm curious.
So there was family from both sides, Doug, in the courtroom today. First of all, a sea of pink outside the courtroom before the doors even opened up. This was interesting because when Steve Lawson appealed his or asked for a new trial, he actually pointed out all of those pink things, all of the pink clothing, saying that was a sign of support that could have influenced the jurors. But the Ballards were unwavering. Everybody wore pink again today as they walked into the courtroom. A lot of the people have been there every single step of the way. Sherry Ballard, that's Crystal's mom, her siblings, Casey Ballard and Brooke, always have been there. Her daughters were there. Cousins, nieces, and nephews were all there, and many of them always are. What was really interesting was who was here and who wasn't here on the other side of the courtroom, and that was for Brooks Houck's family. So Brooks Houck's mom, Rosemary Houck, was not there. Brooks Houck's brother, Nick Houck, was not there. His sister, Rhonda, was there. His stepdad was there. And notably, Doug, actually the son that Crystal and Brooks share, now 13 years old, he was there in the courtroom today.
Election is taking much longer than this trial that happened with Steve Lawson. What stood out to you so far in the questioning back and forth today? Because this went on all day long.
Yeah, jury selection in this one, much more detailed, much more revealing right from the get. What they did here is put these jurors in 4 different groups. So the groups were number 1, I've never heard of the case, I don't know anything about it. Number 2, I've heard about it, not specifics though, and I don't have an opinion. Number 3, I have heard about it, I have heard specifics, but I still don't have an opinion. And then number 4 was, I've heard about it, I've heard specifics, and I have an opinion. And then, Doug, they went one by one, questioning every single juror in those groups 2 and 3, which were the mid-range groups, saying, well, how did you hear about it? Exactly what do you know? And we took some good notes there, finding out what people say that they were able to find out about this case. A lot of people have driven past the billboard on the Bluegrass Parkway many, many times. They said that they don't know anything, but they've seen her face. They know she is a white, blonde female. They know that her car was found there. They know that she's missing because all of that information's on that billboard right there on the Bluegrass Parkway where the car was found. Several people said that they have seen things on social media, on Facebook, on TikTok. Several people, Doug, said that they follow our coverage. They named us saying they keep up on the case this way. So they do feel like they have a lot of information. They've listened to the podcast. They know a lot of details. Many of those people were excused, though. The attorneys deciding too many details, not a good thing here. There was some cases where coworkers knew about it, and when they told their coworkers, hey, I've been called for jury duty next month, the coworkers said, oh, well, that's the Crystal Rogers case. Here's what I know. So there was a lot of people in this jury selection process who had a lot of knowledge of it. And that was a very interesting thing. So that was just the first half of the day, going over those juror questionnaires, trying to find out exactly what people know. There was a whole nother part of jury selection, and I'm going to bring in my colleague Alexandra Goldberg, who was sitting in for that. This was the attorney's questions. This was the prosecutor and the defense attorneys finding out who knows what.
Exactly, Shay. This was really an interesting part of the day. This was after the lunch break, and you'll see me referencing my notes here. Of course, there's no electronics or cameras in in the courtroom, so we'll be referencing her notes to get these quotes as close to verbatim as possible. I'll start with the special prosecutor, Shane Young. One of his lines of questioning here was he asked any of the jurors, and let me back up here and say that the initial juror that was boiled down after the lunch break into 39 potential jurors. So they all sat in a section of the courtroom and were spoke to by the counsel. I'll start with Shane Young. He asked the jury pool if they don't want to sit in the jury. And one juror said that they raised their hand and said that they wanted to be, or not that they wanted to be excused, but they were excused because their friend's son was murdered and the case was too raw for them. I also want to move on to another line of questioning here that Shane Young said. He also asked this jury pool if they would feel sympathy for a victim. Of course, this case has been going on for 10 years now, and that could create some spotty memories that could come out during testimony. He asked jurors if they would be able to, sort of excuse any of this testimony if it was spotty because the case has been going on for so long. He also asked if everyone could agree to judge people on their own merits. He had one really interesting phrase. He said, there are good and bad people in all careers. He said, there's good and bad lawyers, there's good and bad police officers. So he was asking the jury to make sure that they would all judge people based on merit. Now, moving on to Brooks Houck lawyer Brian Butler. Now, when he approached this jury pool of 39 jurors, he really painted this interesting picture here. He brought up other cases that had been tried in recent history, specifically the Karen Reed trial that we just saw verdicts come in just this past week. He brought up the trial of John Benet Ramsey, that pageant girl, which was going on since the 90s. And he really wanted to drill in that point that in these cases, main suspects were proven not guilty in the trial.
He wanted to make sure jurors would have an open mind, right?
Right, and almost paint this picture here of people really being able to understand that these indictments have a lot of impact in people's lives, and to really take the evidence here at face value. He had an interesting quote. He said, quote, jumping to conclusions doesn't always lead to the right decision. Again, that was Brian Butler saying that. He also talked about the nature of Brooks Houck murder charge being related to domestic violence. He has that jury pool of 39 jurors. Please raise your hand if you've experienced domestic violence yourself. A couple of people raised their hand. One potential juror was excused and then replaced because they said that their own experiences with domestic violence could have impacted how they saw this evidence. And then moving on here to Kevin Coleman, who's representing Joey Lawson, sort of more of that questioning based off of just legal philosophy, things like, do you agree that people are innocent until proven guilty? That line of reasoning, and then they were off 30 minutes to do their own jury strikes. Here we are with a 15-person jury. 12 will ultimately make that final decision with 3 alternates.
We do want you to know, Doug, because I know you love to see the makeup of the jury. We just don't have that yet. We were watching from the 2nd floor of the courthouse. All of the jurors were up on the 4th floor, but they took up the whole courtroom. So we watched on a TV downstairs, and that final 15 pool was right out of the camera view. So we don't have a makeup for you just yet.
Okay, we may have some late breaking information on that, Shay, because as you know, our WHS 11 legal analyst Nick Mudd is back with us. He's been following this case for more than a year, and Nick is well connected to many of the attorneys and the sources down there. Again, we welcome back Nick. He's going to be with us every night for the next 2 weeks. You've learned some information about the possible makeup of the jury. Tell me all about that.
My understanding is it's 7 men and 8 women, so it's pretty much split down the middle. I find that interesting.
Vastly different from the Steve Lawson case.
Right. I think the Steve Lawson case had 10 women and 5 men. Now, certainly a jury's a jury, but at this point in time, at least, this jury appears to be pretty much split 50-50 almost.
Do you know anything about the racial makeup, the demographic, any other details?
My understanding is there's 4 to 5 African-American jurors, and I believe 1 Hispanic juror as well, which is also interesting, given the makeup of that community.
Okay, this jury's in it for the long haul. We learned today that this case could now go to July 8th, which takes it past the holiday. How's the judge going to run a trial like that? Will he break for the holiday?
That's a good question, and I've been wondering that myself, Doug. I think it's difficult for attorneys to stop a case, have a very long break, people aren't thinking about it, and then come back and expect jurors to remember things. So I'm curious how the judge is going to handle that. That being said, you can't just stop the case and say, well, we have to finish tonight. I mean, that can't happen if there's much more proof to put on. So it looks like it may go into July 7th or the 8th, according to the court.
So during the course of the day, and I invite many of you all to do the same, I follow our excellent coverage on WHAS11.com. We've got a live blog there written by our journalist Joseph Garcia and Shay McAllister, giving information along with Alexander Goldberg into our newsroom. What popped my interest right away was the prosecutor, Shane Young, saying this quote to the jurors, asking them, "This is what we call a no-body homicide.
Right.
We have not located the victim." This has been hinted about. We've all sort of guessed about it. We've seen years of those massive FBI searches on farm properties and into homes there.
Right.
Really, the first time I've seen it so clearly stated, this is going to be a case without any of the evidence you guys have thought we might have.
Right. I think it's huge. It's a big deal. It's coming out right at the gate and telling the jurors, hey, that is not the kind of case it's going to be. Telling the world that's not the kind of case it's going to be. But it tells us more than that, Doug. It tells us if we don't have a body, then we don't know a cause of death. We don't know about a weapon. We don't know where her body may have been disposed of. So it leaves a lot of things open. And I think that what we saw today with Shane Young, he questioned the jurors about that. And several of the jurors piped up and said, look, I can't convict someone of murder if there's not a body. And that's a big deal. And it was a great question from the prosecution, but it really opened up the door to giving us a peek of what's to come. And it really showed, though, that it makes it hard to convict someone of murder when you don't have a body.
So Shay said it just a second ago, on this case, we could learn so much information we've always wondered about, never heard about it. This is called the Bardstown murder mystery for a reason, Nick.
Right.
We've not known for 10 years. How ironic that 10-year date is coming up right about the time we could be getting a verdict from this jury. The big question, will we learn how Crystal Rogers died?
I don't believe we will.
Really?
I think the way that the prosecution is going to build their case is through a timeline. They're going to narrow it down, and they're going to show that Brooks Houck was the last person to be with her when she was alive, that had contact with her, and they're going to do it through witnesses. They're going to do it through phone records, and they're going to kind of take that and build what's called a circumstantial case to point to say, hey, you're the only possible person that could have done this.
But don't you think that information about how she died could come out in what they got from text messages and the phone records?
It could, but, I think not having a body, which means we don't have an official scientific cause of death from a medical examiner, is really difficult to really pinpoint what that cause of death is going to be.
But in cross-examination, could we learn how she died?
Anything's possible at this point.
But you don't think so?
But I don't think so. I don't believe that at all.
Do they put Brooks Houck on the stand like they did Steve Lawson?
Doug, I cannot. I'm not even going there yet. We are way too early to make that prediction.
Okay, you're sure about that? You don't think Brooks Houck will go on the stand? I mean, because you changed your opinion on the Steve Lawson.
I'm saying it's way too early to say. Let's see how the proof comes out, and let's see the way the case is steered and the way the cross-examination goes. And give me a week and a half, and then I'll give my prediction.
Okay, you've been correct so far in your early predictions. That's through the Lawson case, the first one. Let's go back to Shay and talk to her about not only the witnesses, but Shay, there you have the information that Nick is getting. He believes, is hearing that the jury is 7 men and 8 women.
Yeah, Doug, so we learned a little bit more about the witnesses during jury selection today, because who the witnesses are and if any potential jurors know them is a really important part of jury selection. So the prosecutors and the defense attorneys listed off everyone who they might call. And out of the 20 names from the prosecutor and the 15 names from the defense attorneys, I only recognized a handful, but I think people at home might recognize some of these too. Kylie Fenwick, that's Crystal's daughter. She is the last person outside of the Houck family to see Crystal alive. She was at the house when Brooks, Crystal, and their son left on that July 3rd night. John Snow, he's the Nelson County detective who was the lead on this case for the first 5 years of the investigation. Former Sheriff Ed Mattingly, he was the sheriff who named Brooks Houck the main suspect back in 2015 and said that Crystal is presumed dead. after that press conference, that was the last time we've heard from him. So 10 years later, it'd be really interesting to see what he has to say. Diane Thompson, she is the clerk in Nelson County within the court. Stacy Cranmer and Charlie Girdley, both of them are former employees of Brooks Houck. They both testified at the Steve Lawson trial, telling different stories about what they had heard, the conversations that they had, really playing into the conspiracy charge. Then we had a couple of names who are police detectives or police adjacent, such as an FBI detective who we know worked on this case, and Rick Sanders, who was the former KSP commissioner. Very interesting one there. As far as the defense goes, Brooks Houck's attorney said that they'll be calling up potentially Ed Mattingly again, the former sheriff, Rhonda McElroy, she is Brooks' sister, and then some of the KSP detectives who took this case over when John Snow retired. So very interesting always to hear that witness list, and of course it doesn't guarantee that any of them will be called, but there was no conflicts of interest from the jury.
You know this family so well. If information like how she died and the fact that they have no evidence of where she is doesn't come out, are they still going to get the closure they need? I guess it would be the guilty verdict in the end?
I think so, Doug. I spent a lot of time talking to the Ballard family today, and if I'm going to portray how they were, to me, they seemed confident, they seemed at peace, they seemed very happy and supported. I think this is a time that they have been waiting so long for, and they really feel like this is going to go their way. I know Sherry has said countless times that hearing the details of her daughter's death would be horrific. It would be one of the worst days of her life. But she defined the final verdict day for the Steve Lawson trial. She told me later that night it was the best and worst day of her life. So there is good to be had from getting that kind of closure, and I know that they're definitely hopeful for that.
You sat through a lot today. What comes to your mind right off the top that so far has made you realize, as you just reported, we may learn a lot more even about this mystery, even though we may not learn the key points that we just went over?
Well, I'll bring in my colleague Alexandra Goldberg for that, because she was sitting in on this too. The same thing stood out to both of us, which was this no-body homicide, knowing for sure that we aren't going to hear where Crystal is. We don't know if we'll learn how she was killed. We'll have to wait for that. But that's been a question, is will we actually, have they found a body? And it seems no, they haven't.
No, it seems exactly like that from what we heard in the courtroom today. We even know that Shane Young asked that jury pool about this. He said, would it be difficult to convict, someone if there is no body? One juror did raise their hand and said that they thought it would be difficult to do that. Of course, Shane Young really hammered home that this was going to be prosecuted on circumstantial evidence. One other thing that he asked jurors was, could you weigh circumstantial evidence and physical evidence equally? So jurors kind of debated that as well.
He gave that example, which I've heard him give before, and that is if you go in your house at night and the ground is clear, you see the green grass, nothing's happening outside, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning and there's snow on the ground, you can infer that it snowed overnight. You didn't see it snow, but you can infer that it snowed. And he said that's a circumstantial case. That's what we're talking about here. But people did push back on that and say they would need more information.
There was pushback, and I think that's a really interesting example he gave too, because when he was sort of going back and forth with one of the jurors, he said, well, can you prove something happened without seeing how it happened? And I think seeing the distinction there is really key and gives us good insight into how Shane Young will set up his prosecution. In this case, we'll see a lot of the evidence surrounding what they've gathered over the past 10 years, but with no body, with no weapon, a lot of those really, there's no smoking gun.
Maybe not answers to those key questions, Doug, that people have been asking so long.
Okay, Shay, thank you very much. Nick Mudd listening to you both. He wants to talk that over. And Nick, right away, first of all, I want to ask you about what Shay just reported there about Ed Mattingly, the sheriff, who named him the chief suspect years ago. This is a man who seemed to be, he's the one who sent the signal to the world of Kentucky at the time that we believe he did it, but we can't arrest him. How important is he going to be there for the jury to hear? And could he reveal new information? Is he allowed to, or would it be speculation?
He can't speculate on what he thinks happened, but he can talk about evidence he collected, people he talked to, the investigation that he conducted, and he could talk about why he concluded Brooks Houck, why he believed Brooks Houck was involved in the murder of Crystal Rogers. That being said, there's been a lengthy investigation by multiple agencies here, multiple investigators, but he was really the guy at the beginning. And so, he may provide information that really goes to the source, the start of everything that got involved in this investigation and why Brooks Houck became the initial suspect. And that's going to be the question we want answered. You
know so many of the key players who are trying this case. You've been longtime friends with them, acquaintances. You've battled with them in courtrooms. We've talked a lot about Shane Young, the prosecutor. Mm-hmm. Brian Butler, the former U.S. prosecutor in Louisville, the heavyweight attorney now, is representing Brooks Houck. What did he say today that caught your attention?
A couple things. Number one, I will tell you in this case, he probed very hard into the media knowledge that the jurors had. And the judge here was much more careful and much more proactive, striking jurors who may have heard about the case and had information about it. Number two, I thought it was very interesting. He phrased the case as a domestic violence case. And he asked the jury panel as a whole, had anybody's family been affected by domestic violence, been a victim of domestic violence? And that did result in multiple jurors being struck. So I thought that was important. The third thing I thought was interesting is he made a parallel with this case with the Karen Reed trial that just concluded up north. I think there was ultimately a not guilty verdict there. Essentially saying, look, the media, newspaper, et cetera, anybody may plaster my client's name all over the place, but that doesn't mean he's guilty. And let's stop for a second, look at the facts, and, when you do so, you're going to find my client not guilty, something to that effect.
Okay, so I grilled you a lot about do you put Brooks Houck on the stand, but do you bring Steve Lawson in from prison and put him on the stand? Do you put Joseph Lawson on the stand in this case?
I don't believe Steve Lawson's going to testify here. He's pending sentencing. As far as I know, no deal was cut. And, at my understanding, he still has a Fifth Amendment right because he can be charged federally. Won't happen, but he still has a Fifth Amendment right. Probably not going to testify. Now, Joseph Lawson is the more interesting question. He may take the Stephen Lawson approach and say, hey, I'm going to concede to tampering, but I'm not going to concede, being guilty of murder. He could do something crazy and testify and say, I'm going to concede the tampering, but I'm going to blame my father for doing the conspiracy to commit murder. Wasn't me, it was my dad. Now, that would be an interesting twist of events.
Does Brian Butler try to pin the murder of Crystal Rogers on the Lawsons to take it off of Brooks Houck?
That's also possible. I mean, my understanding is I think they have a defense. I don't know what that defense will be, but I'm going to tell you they will have a defense for Brooks Houck, and they're going to be ready to present that defense once their time comes.
So if you could boil down and look ahead more than 2 weeks, again, it was revealed today this trial could go to the 8th of July, most likely taking a break on the 4th of July. They wouldn't be in trial on the 4th of July.
No. I mean, I guess anything's possible, but I would say that 99% will not happen there.
So the key points you're looking at, what is it out of the starting gate? Is it going to be in the middle of the trial? And who do you think has to get the upper edge the fastest in this case?
I think a lot of times what the prosecutor does is make the impact showing of her death with the family. They usually put a family member up first, and then they start with lead investigators. A lot of times it's either save them at the beginning or the end, but someone involved with kind of explaining the roadmap of what's to come for the trial and what's to expect for the rest of the witnesses. So I think you're going to see out of the gate tomorrow, we're going to see the battle start.
The battle starts. Okay. Nick, hang tight. We'll wrap it up here in just a second. But first, this case has been a mystery for people living in Bardstown for nearly a decade now. And now they hope this trial brings some answers to them. So we went back to Bardstown for the beginning of the second trial today. Our Isaiah Kim Martinez and senior photojournalist Alyssa Newton are reporting from Nelson County.
From our Sky 11 drone, the picturesque city of Bardstown, known for its charm, waits a decision on a murder mystery that has gripped the state.
What does it mean to have a chief suspect on trial?
I mean, it's obviously huge.
Jody Gilliland is a former lead detective locally in the Crystal Rogers case before the FBI officially took it over.
So they've charged him, but now we got to prove it, and you only get one shot at it.
For 2 years, he helped sift through the many tips sent to the sheriff's office. Now he, like so many in Bardstown, have put up the famous pink signs.
I put it out this morning.
Prayers for Crystal.
I feel nervous. I'm antsy. You know, I mean, a lot of us, we just want the truth. We want to know what happened.
Gilliland, now a real estate broker, is showing his support for the family from afar.
That's my way of doing it now. I can't do it from the law enforcement side anymore, so that's kind of what I do to keep everybody in mind of we lost some good people.
We're close to 10 years to the day when such a key piece of evidence in this case was found, and that was Crystal Rogers' car abandoned on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway with her keys, her purse, and her phone still inside.
It's still very fresh. It's still like it just happened.
Keisha Copeland is a former Bardstown councilwoman who was in office when Crystal was reported missing. I asked her what 2 more convictions would mean for this community and the family.
It would lift that cloud. I mean, it's always going to be heavy, but to know that you were able to get someone behind bars and hopefully be able to get the remains of her daughter.
There's immense hope this trial will reveal answers. What happened to Crystal, and is Brooks Houck responsible? In Bardstown, Isaiah Kim Martinez, WHAS 11 on your side.
And so now it begins. So much we want to know about this long-running Bardstown mystery. Nick Mudd is going to be with us every night at 5:30 on WHAS 11 News, and of course right here on WHAS 11 Plus each night at 9 p.m. Opening statements start early at 9:30 tomorrow morning, 9:30 Eastern Time. You can also follow along on the best blog on this case in the city on WHAS11.com, in addition to our coverage on WHAS 11 News. We're going to be back here again tomorrow night at 9, a deep dive on the day's proceedings, the final trial in the murder mystery of Crystal Rogers on WHAS 11 Plus.